In 1995, Square Company Limited shocked the gaming world when it released Chrono Trigger, an RPG created by the Dream Team, featuring the minds behind Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, in a collaboration that many had always dreamed of, but also felt impossible. In 1996, Square followed up with a second Dream Team, joining up with Nintendo to create a new role-playing game with the most famous character of all. Stay here for the story of Super Mario RPG. Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars, was a collaboration one could only dream of, featuring Square, who produced some of the best games of the early 90s, working side by side with Shigeru Miyamoto, the father of Mario, to create a game that ended up being more than the sum of its parts, with a legacy that reverberates today. Square had been publishing games on Nintendo hardware for about 10 years when Super Mario RPG landed in the spring of 1996. The ties that the two companies had forged over the years made a crossover like Super Mario RPG a very sensible decision on paper, even though the idea took a decade to become reality. Square Company Limited, sometimes referred to as Squaresoft, began operations in 1983. Its founder, Masafumi Miyamoto, no relation to Shigeru, started the operation as a division within his father, Kunichi Miyamoto's company, Denyusha. Having nothing to do with games at all, the company manufactured power lines and electrical equipment used by power utilities throughout Japan. Masafumi, aware of the ongoing PC boom, saw the need to modernize the company before others did, leaving Denyusha in the dust. His father agreed, and Masafumi set up operations in an abandoned beauty shop. He chose the name Square, referring to a square shot in golf, a perfect drive, as well as a town square where people can gather and interact with each other. He hired young graduates to build new software, a few of which were accounting and database programs. After all, they were a division of an electric company. One of the first hires by Square, Hironobu Sakaguchi, developed the first proper Square game, The Death Trap, in 1984. Notable for its use of full-screen color graphics, albeit still images, at a time when most PC adventure games were text-only affairs. More games followed, leading to growth in the company. Square turned its attention to Nintendo and the Family Computer Disk System, released in 1986. The lower production costs and familiarity of the floppy disk medium made for a natural fit. By the arrival of the first disk system game, King's Knight, Square had formally separated from its parent company and was now operating out of a much nicer building in Ginza, one of the richest parts of Tokyo. Most of that was for show and prestige. The company, while successful, was not very profitable. Square could cover costs and get the next game out the door, but things were always tight. That is, until Final Fantasy came along in 1987, forever changing the course of the company into an RPG powerhouse. 6 Final Fantasy games, 3 on the Family Computer, 3 on the Super Famicom, arrived in almost annual fashion. Other series, Saga, Mana, and Hanjuku Hero, soon appeared afterwards. The number of titles was a boost for Nintendo, who were happy to have Square's games appear on their hardware. Many of those games became million sellers in Japan. As time went on, the relationship between Square and Nintendo became very close. This was very apparent in the United States, where Nintendo published the game Highway Star on Square's behalf, renaming it Rad Racer, then brought Final Fantasy stateside with a full English translation. More than that, Nintendo covered the game in multiple issues of Nintendo Power across 1990, culminating with a comprehensive, separate strategy guide for the game. Square eventually opened its own offices down the street from Nintendo in Redmond, Washington, localizing titles on its own, but always receiving a promotional assist from Nintendo. Square was never owned wholly or in part by the Big N, but the relationship was as close as one could get without crossing that line. While Square was very successful from 1987 onwards, there was always a white whale they could never seem to catch. Square's games, not to mention RPGs in general, never sold as well in the US as they had in Japan. Although the genre had faithful American fans, sales numbers don't lie and showed a disparity in the 8 and 16-bit days. That didn't deter Square, as they were never afraid to experiment to reach new audiences. Luck was also on their side, as several key events changed the course of the company, eventually leading to Super Mario RPG. In 1992, Square made its first attempt at a game developed with Americans in mind, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, a game that had the atmosphere of past Final Fantasy titles with a simplified presentation. The world map was very linear. The player was guided along a single pathway. There were only 2 playable characters, each with a health meter, though you could still see hit points if you liked. The battles were turn-based, not active time, and the overall game was much shorter. Mystic Quest received positive reviews, but not nearly as high as past games. For fans of the mainline Final Fantasy, the game was far too easy. Newcomers weren't drawn in, as a game with little action, not much decision-making, and more text than they were used to wasn't all that engaging. Mystic Quest sold about 800,000 copies worldwide. In the US, it sold less than half the total number, a performance worse than Final Fantasy II. You could call Mystic Quest a failure or a noble experiment. There can be enjoyment in it, but the game is best remembered as a sterling example of what not to do. In 1993, Square released Secret of Mana. The game was a proper sequel to the Game Boy title Final Fantasy Adventure, which plays more like The Legend of Zelda than its namesake. Secret of Mana wasn't simplified like Mystic Quest. It steered away from what management assumed Americans disliked in RPGs, while streamlining many gameplay elements that worked great with an engaging story. The party only had 3 characters, each of whom could be controlled by individual players. Stats were balanced with both numbers and meters that were easy to understand. The combat system eliminated random encounters, and while there was still some linearity, exploring felt fairly open and free. The reception to Secret of Mana was positive, selling in the same range as the American Final Fantasy II and above Mystic Quest. Concurrently with the development of Secret of Mana, Square began to arrange the original Dream Team, Hironobu Sakaguchi, Yuji Horii, and Akira Toriyama, to create the dream game, Chrono Trigger, the ultimate collaboration of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. The development of Secret of Mana had a heavy influence on Chrono Trigger, and the success of Mana after release further pushed gameplay in a similar direction. Eventually released in 1995, Chrono Trigger was critically acclaimed, with higher American review scores and awards over games like Diddy's Kong Quest and Yoshi's Island. Along with Final Fantasy III, the best-selling American RPG so far, it showed that, when done right, the role-playing genre can do well outside of Japan. But before Chrono Trigger ever hit store shelves, the news of the Dream Team drew the eye of Nintendo and its main man, Shigeru Miyamoto, no relation to Square founder Masafumi. Shigeru felt that a formal collaboration between Nintendo and Square could draw as many headlines as the Dream Team. Square could take advantage of Nintendo's internal resources, programming, publishing, and promotion, while Nintendo could make great use of Square's vast RPG resume. And the two had gotten along so well in the past, side by side, that they may as well work together and see what greatness they could produce as one unit. In the middle of 1994, a deal was signed. Square and Nintendo were officially working together. A second Dream Team and a new RPG with the most famous gaming character around. In the 16-bit era, Nintendo made only one proper Super Mario Bros. Game, the very first Super Famicom game, Super Mario World. In the absence of sequels, the flagship character started to appear in racing, puzzle, and shooting games to keep him relevant. This was also a clever way to insert him into new situations and give otherwise average games more appeal. Shigeru Miyamoto had always wanted to put Mario into a role-playing game as well. However, as evidenced by the Zelda and Fire Emblem series, games with adventure as the focus were often more serious than not. Earthbound was a bit more wacky. but Mario in these games just wouldn't feel right. The partnership with Square was the perfect opportunity. A skilled team with years of experience and the drive to make every game better than the last one that came before it. Something Nintendo also believed in. For Super Mario RPG, Shigeru Miyamoto served as producer, overseeing all of the game's elements, design, and general direction. Along with this game, he was working concurrently on numerous projects, namely Yoshi's Island and Super Mario 64. From Nintendo, Kensuke Tanabe contributed as a scenario writer. He had worked on A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, as well as Super Mario Bros. 2 and 3. He knew Mario well and had some experience in games that were a little more dramatic, too. A very good choice when it came to writing the script. On the Square side, Chihiro Fujioka directed the game. Though a musician by trade, his most recent Square works were Final Fantasy Legend III and Mystic Quest. Yoko Shimomura composed the soundtrack. She originally started her career with Capcom, scoring a large amount of the Street Fighter II soundtrack. Her work on Breath of Fire brought her into Square's orbit, with Live Alive being her first contribution there. Most of the graphical design and programming was handled by Square. Future famous names, Hideo Minaba and Kiyofumi Kato, contributed here. The team worked closely deciding just what kind of graphical style, battle system, and story would best suit Mario in an RPG. However, with Miyamoto as the final arbiter, many of the concepts weren't derived as positive choices, but more of what could be cobbled together after the boss's long list of vetoes. For example, Mario could not wield swords, summon monsters, have job classes, or other common RPG elements. Items were also restricted to familiar Mario themes: coins, mushrooms, flowers, keys, blocks, stars, and the like. Enemies include the familiar Koopa Troopas, Goombas, Bob-ombs, Shy Guys, Bloopers, Chain Chomps, even Wigglers, and a few unexpected cameos. But the roster of bad guys eventually had dozens of original creations. As for the party, Mario was naturally the leader, but a few characters were created to aid Mario on his quest. Mallow, a cloud-like boy who believes he's a tadpole when the adventure begins. That's because he was raised by a frog. And Gino, a sentient toy who totes a mean gun and wears a styling cape. This is one doll you don't want to mess with. With only a handful of characters, the maximum party size was set at 3. The graphics had to match the style of worlds that Mario had previously ventured into, but 16-bit graphics were rapidly changing, thanks to new standards introduced by Donkey Kong Country. Super Mario RPG had no choice but to embrace 3D modeling. To help enhance graphical detail, the playfield was set at a 2:1 dimetric projection. The field of view helped convey a 3D image in a 2D game. It also separated this new game and how it played from past Mario games. Keeping in line with most of Square's non-Final Fantasy games, the battles were not random. The player had to engage with enemies to begin fighting. Once the battle begins, Mario and his party select commands from a menu: attacks, special moves, items, or defense. On screen, the choice of buttons, Y, X, B, and A, are shown, each one having a different function. A is for standard attacks. X is for items. B can have the character defend or run away. Y is for special techniques, aka magic. Mario can perform super jumps or throw fireballs. Mallow can make it rain or snow. Gino can fire beams. I guess Nintendo didn't want to say gun. Timing is crucial. Hitting A right on the mark will result in a more powerful attack. It sounds like the battles are all action, though the choices do have small, simple menus. A nice balance where players don't get bogged down in a list of hundreds of choices. All of these special actions require flower points, FP for short. The entire party used a shared reserve of FP, and the more powerful an attack is, the more FP it uses. Although traditional leveling up is in Super Mario RPG, just progressing through the game will be enough to get the job done, without taking a few hours to stop and grind levels. After each level up, the player can choose which area to increase: attacks, hit points, or magic. If you do try to level grind, you'll find that you can only go up to level 30 and stop there. Every now and then Mario can play mini-games. In Beetle Race, collect as many beetles as you can while racing up a hill. Minecart Madness gives the 3D renders a break, and graphics return to good old Mode 7. There are more mini-games than just these, waiting to be discovered and enjoyed. Outside of these features, there is a huge world to explore. featuring lengthy conversations with townsfolk, eccentric travelers, and even a few baddies. Everyone has something interesting to say, and the humor really shines through, leaving a game that balances action and strategy very well with an engaging story. And what is the full story of Super Mario RPG? It all begins as you'd likely expect, with Mario braving the depths of Bowser's castle to rescue the princess. During the ultimate confrontation, something unexpected happens. A massive sword crashes down from the sky and embeds itself into the castle. The shock scatters everyone in different directions and destroys the bridge beneath them. The sword turns out to be part of a new invading force known as the Smithy Gang, a group of living weapons that begin to embed themselves everywhere. Their arrival also shatters the Star Road, the place where people of the world can have their wishes granted. The pieces of the shattered Star Road scatter across the land. After venturing out on his own, Mario meets Mallow, a strange cloud-like boy who thinks he's a tadpole. While helping Mallow recover a stolen coin from the thief Croco, Mario and his new friend begin to search for the missing star pieces. Not long after, Mario encounters Geno, a mysterious warrior who has descended from the heavens with a mission to restore the broken Star Road. Geno explains that the scattered star pieces must be recovered quickly before the Smithy Gang can use them. As the journey continues, Mario and his companions travel through towns, forests, mines, and castles while confronting members of the Smithy Gang who guard the star pieces. Eventually, even Bowser finds himself displaced by the Smithies. With his fortress occupied, he reluctantly joins Mario's group, forming an unlikely alliance. It's the only way he can get his castle back. Princess Toadstool joins the battle, leaving the Mushroom Kingdom behind and turning the rescue mission into a full-fledged adventure. As the party travels across the world in search of the scattered star pieces, they encounter the strange people and places left in the wake of the invasion, and confronts members of the Smithy Gang who have taken control of key regions. Along the way, the heroes gradually recover the star pieces, learning more about the strange army of living weapons and the force directing them from behind the scenes. Eventually, the search leads the party to Nimbus Land, where the self-proclaimed Queen Valentina has seized power with the help of the invaders. After restoring order and recovering another star piece, the trail finally points toward the source of the entire crisis: Smithy, the creator of the weapon army wreaking havoc around the world. Can Mario and his newfound friends survive Smithy's factory, repair the Star Road, and save the world? Only the bravest heroes can.
Always peaceful in the Mushroom Kingdom. Till Smithy the sword shatters the Star Road. Wow! So with his old enemy Bowser and a marshmallow who throws lightning. Mario fought evil wedding cakes and a killer Venus flytraps and recovered the 7 stars!
Grandfather's freaky.
Super Mario RPG, only on the system that keeps on kicking. Super NES.
Dig it?
While the efforts to make Super Mario RPG began behind closed doors in 1994, it took almost a year until the summer of 1995 for the general public to learn of the game and see it firsthand. The first demonstration of Super Mario RPG took place at the 1995 V-Jump Festival, where the best manga, anime, and game creators meet the public and show off their latest upcoming works. At this point in time, the original Dream game, Chrono Trigger, had gone on sale and was still active on the sales charts, but the members had moved on, with Yuji Horii showcasing Dragon Quest VI. Later in the event, Chihiro Fujioka and Shigeru Miyamoto took the stage to announce Super Mario RPG. The entrance brought the house down. Usually, Nintendo and their staff made appearances at events that they controlled, such as Space World. Appearing in an event like this was unexpected. Then, to announce to an audience of hardcore role-playing fans that Mario was getting his own RPG, and that it was produced in conjunction with Square, was an even bigger shock to the system. A highlight reel of gameplay and pre-rendered animation was shown off, followed by a list of familiar characters and explanations of locales within the game, concluding with a detailed discussion that explained how the collaboration came about and why a Super Famicom RPG was the perfect place for Mario, at this stage of the 16-bit cycle. It was an era that was at the beginning of the end. The 32-bit Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation were already on sale. Nintendo had been previewing the Nintendo 64 for about 2 years, continually delaying release. Super Mario 64 had long been known as one of the first games that would arrive with the N64, but that day was not this day. Super Mario RPG was the perfect thing in this situation. It wasn't just that something was needed to fill the few months before Super Mario 64. The N64 would be in short supply and very high demand on day one. Not everyone would get their hands on one, and might not for a long time. Super Mario RPG could close that gap for the early adopter. And secondly, for the larger part of the user base that hung on to 16-bit until jumping to next-gen mid-life cycle. Either way, the news was exciting. Previews followed in the usual print media, as well as speculation from journalists, opinions from readers, and the occasional interview from production staff. Coverage continued throughout the year, leading up to the Japanese street date, March 9th, 1996. With Super Mario RPG came a welcome surprise from Nintendo, a special low price for the cartridge, 7,500 yen, about $80 in 1996, and roughly the same price as higher-end Switch 2 games 30 years later. Compared to Dragon Quest VI, which sold for 11,400 yen, or about $110, Super Mario RPG was a comparative steal. In the March 15, 1996 issue of Famitsu magazine, the cross-review team gave Super Mario RPG a score of 32 out of 40, saying the graphics were super beautiful with cute characters, that Square did an excellent job, and that the game had a simple battle system, but that the game takes some getting used to, while warning that if you only play the main story and skip the mini-games, everything feels short. They wrap things up by saying although the game doesn't look like Mario, it is still Mario at heart. Super Mario RPG debuted at number 1 on Famitsu's Top 30 sales charts. The game stayed in the top 5 through May and fell slightly after the release of the N64 in Japan, before exiting the charts at the end of July. Super Mario RPG sold well in Japan, giving consumers one more reason not to pack away the Super Famicom just yet. By the end of the life of the Super Famicom, Super Mario RPG sold 1,470,000 units. After going out to homes in Japan, previews of the game started to appear in American gaming magazines, with translation duties handled by Ted Woosley, who had worked on Square's biggest games to date. Fans who were familiar with those works knew they were in for something special. Soon, Super Mario RPG appeared, localized, with the subtitle Legend of the Seven Stars. Nintendo Power naturally gave the most coverage, with lengthy previews ahead of the US debut, set for May 13, 1996. All of the characters and some of the story, without spoilers, were covered throughout early '96. In the May issue, a full spread featured the first few parts of the quest. Even with a 3D perspective, Nintendo Power stitched together detailed maps for several areas. The May issue also included a tear-out poster and character cards. The magazine gave Legend of the Seven Stars an average score of 4.1 out of 5, or 82% on a scale of 100. It's worth noting that Nintendo Power had never given a perfect score up to this point, and anything over 4 out of 5 was considered excellent. The magazine states, "The excellent 3D graphics and a rich variety of gameplay will appeal to a much wider audience than most traditional RPGs, and that the collaboration of Square and Shigeru Miyamoto produced spectacular results." Electronic Gaming Monthly gave a score of 35 out of 40 in May 1996. The review crew was surprised to see a Mario game coming out just before the N64. Individually, the crew was split on whether expanding him into new genres was a good idea. Die Hard Game Fan issued an average score of 97% in the same month. The Viewpoint writers opined that with Square and Nintendo, there was no possibility of anything less than awesome, asking, how did Square manage to get this game into a 16-bit cartridge? And stating that Super Mario RPG is everything that a Mario game and Square RPG should be. GamePro magazine gave a perfect score in its May issue. The Pro Review spent much of its time covering tips and strategies for the opening hours of the game. but drifted into commentary, saying that the game holds its own against the high standards of other RPGs, namely for its fast, funny action and great rendered graphics. Legend of the Seven Stars was well received in America, selling 670,000 units and remaining in print until the end of 1998. For those who still played 16-bit, it was a great addition to the lineup that kept the Super NES relevant in its twilight years. However, the sales numbers were not record-breaking, falling short of Final Fantasy III and failing to break 1 million. The noble experiment wasn't a failure, though events in its release window would make Super Mario RPG infamous.
毎日ゴルフにパーティーにテニスも始めて何か忘れてる。そうだ、冒険だ。ペーパーマリオが仲間と一緒に大冒険。任天堂64マリオストーリー。
During the time frame between the completion and release of Super Mario RPG, several noteworthy historical events were taking place. The Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation had been on sale in Japan for over a year at the start of 1996. Sega led over Sony out of the gate, but it was still anybody's game. Both had sold over 2 million units, each in that first year. The Nintendo 64 was in the news, but always to announce delay after delay after delay. Nintendo diehards were frustrated, while others were ready to move on. Delays could always be fixed with killer games, but what became the undoing of the N64 was the use of cartridges over CD-ROMs. That decision made things difficult for Square. With a cartridge, their vision of Final Fantasy VII was just not possible. Sony offered to bring the game to the PlayStation with full support from the company, including development tools, manufacturing, distribution, and promotion to let Square make the game they always wanted to, with the success it deserved. Square agreed, and on January 12, 1996, publicly announced that Final Fantasy VII would be exclusive to the PlayStation, and that Square would not be developing anything for Nintendo ever again. On that day, Super Mario RPG was finished, but not yet on sale. The news hung like a dark cloud over what was a great collaboration and product. Just the news of Final Fantasy VII, which was still over a year away, drove the number of PlayStation sales past the Saturn, and as the year went on, the lead increased. As Super Mario RPG was in Super Famicoms across Japan, Sega and Sony cut the price of their hardware to 20,000 yen, 5,000 yen less than what the N64 was projected to cost on its eventual launch day, June 23rd. In the same issue of Famitsu that reviewed Super Mario RPG, Nintendo ran an advertisement, an open call for programmers and artists to work on Super Mario RPG 2. A small and subtle dig at Square that also spoke volumes. After March 1996, the final 2 Square Super Famicom games, Treasure of the Rudras and Treasure Hunter G, arrived in April and May. In the US, Legend of the Seven Stars would be the end. The first Square PlayStation game, Tobal No. 1, came with a playable demo for Final Fantasy VII, causing another spike in hardware sales. More third-party publishers moved their projects to PlayStation, furthering the snowball effect. When the completed game arrived in Japan in January 1997, the next-gen wars were effectively over. Sony had already sold over 5.5 million PlayStations, a number larger than all the N64s Nintendo would ever sell in the region. The Sega Saturn also outsold the N64 when it was all said and done, an embarrassing third-place finish from the once mighty company. Final Fantasy VII would become the second best-selling PlayStation game of all time, racking up worldwide sales of 10 million, selling almost 4 million in Japan and over 3 million in the US. The remaining 3 million were sold in the UK, Europe, and Australia, where the series was sold for the first time. With Final Fantasy VII, Square had finally achieved what they had always wanted: mainstream success outside of Japan. Nintendo moved on after the divorce. Super Mario RPG 2 eventually came to pass, though it was a very different game. Paper Mario, arriving on the N64 in the year 2000 in Japan and 2001 everywhere else. Shigeru Miyamoto was still at the helm, but without Square, Nintendo turned to Intelligent Systems, who had almost as much turn-based experience, having produced Famicom Wars and Fire Emblem. Themes shared with the original included the use of flower points as a shared party resource, timed action commands during battles, and the collection of 7 stars as an overall goal. Graphically, the style changed. Ironically, to 2D artwork, Mario became a flat image with little animation, who interacted with others who were also depth-challenged. It gave the game a unique contrast to almost every other game that filled the screen with polygons in continual motion. Much like the original Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario was a late-in-life boost for Nintendo's hardware, giving the N64 just enough steam as developers moved on to the GameCube, where the series continued in 2004 with the Thousand-Year Door. Every generation of hardware since has had at least one Paper Mario game to go with it. The Origami King was released for the Switch in 2020, while a remake of the Thousand-Year Door arrived in 2024. In 2003, 7 years after the Square-Nintendo divorce, the makeup of the industry changed again when Square merged with their former rival Enix, with a successor company formerly known as Square Enix. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles for the GameCube was heralded as the series' grand return to Nintendo hardware. The part of the story that slips through the cracks is that, in a way, Square and Nintendo were still working together. Chihiro Fujioka founded his own studio, Alpha Dream, in 2000 and brought along others who worked at Square. The company stuck to Game Boy and DS family hardware, producing several role-play titles throughout the 2000s. None were as impactful as Mario & Luigi RPG for the Game Boy Advance, where Shigeru Miyamoto and some of the Super Mario RPG team worked side by side once more. Mario and Luigi are the only 2 playable characters, each one controlled by a different button, mixing turn-based battles with quick-thinking, fast actions. Many of the challenges involve puzzle solving, with managing both characters at the same time as just one part of the challenge. In English, the game was known as Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. The story, script, and dialogue are fondly remembered, with many gags, puns, in-jokes, and references to Nintendo's catalog of games and legacy. From there, Alpha Dream made Mario & Luigi RPG their main focus. Multiple sequels came down the line, and the series even had a crossover with Paper Mario in Paper Jam. The company went bankrupt in 2019, though the series continued on with Brothership for the Switch in 2024. As for the original Legend of the Seven Stars, the game was re-released on Virtual Console and the Classic Mini, but no proper ports or remakes were seen until 2023, when the game was fully remade for the Switch. The new version featured updated graphics and a tightened script that brought things in line with the modern Mario universe, Princess Toadstool, now named Peach, being one crucial change. There's a choice of classic 16-bit music or a new orchestrated arrangement, and much of the gameplay is streamlined with a visible action gauge, chain combo system, and triple attacks, in addition to the game just running faster overall. And of course, the best improvement to any and all RPGs in the modern era, continuous auto-saving everywhere. And while in 1996, Square's goal of mainstream success outside of Japan had not quite been realized, those efforts mattered. Today, many role-playing games are released on the same day around the world, fully translated, and not only in English, but into the native languages of the markets where they're sold. In hindsight, it was never going to be just one game that broke those barriers. It couldn't be. Square, Nintendo, and the rest simply had to channel their inner Mario and keep hammering away until it finally happened.